Kevin Stefanski just got vindicated in the most brutal way possible, and what happened inside the Cleveland Browns locker room on Saturday is proving that his warnings about Deshaun Watson were absolutely accurate, even though he got fired for completely different reasons. Here's what actually happened. Stefanski was fired because he refused to hand Shedeur Sanders the starting job immediately and wanted to develop him slowly, which Jimmy Haslam couldn't tolerate. But during his time as Browns coach, Stefanski also warned ownership repeatedly that Watson's contract would destroy the locker room, that players would resent him for consuming resources while underperforming, and that if Watson ever returned after suspension, it would trigger massive conflict. Haslam ignored those warnings, kept Watson around, and fired Stefanski over the Shedeur issue instead. Now, Watson just got medically cleared, showed up at the facility, and within hours, a sixth-round rookie safety named Clive Brown confronted him in front of the entire team and told him to leave because his contract is destroying the roster. The confrontation almost turned physical. The locker room split into factions, and everything Stefanski predicted about Watson is coming true. The irony is devastating. Stefanski got fired for being right about how to develop Shedeur, but his warnings about Watson that nobody listened to are now tearing the team apart exactly as he said they would. To understand the full weight of what happened on Saturday, February 21, 2026, you need to understand that Kevin Stefanski's departure from the Cleveland Browns involved two completely separate issues that got tangled together in ways that left the organization worse off on both fronts. The public story that most people know is that Stefanski was fired in early 2026 because of his approach to Shedeur Sanders. According to sources familiar with the internal discussions, after the Browns completed the three-team trade to move up to third overall and drafted Shedeur, Jimmy Haslam expected the rookie quarterback to be named the starter immediately and to begin taking first-team reps from day one. But Stefanski, according to these sources, had a different philosophy. Stefanski believed that Shedeur, despite his talent, needed time to adjust to NFL speed and complexity, and that throwing him into the starting role before he was ready would hurt his development and potentially damage his confidence. Stefanski's plan, according to sources, was to start Malik Willis or another veteran for the first several games of the 2026 season, while Shedeur learned the offense, studied NFL defenses, and developed his mechanics and decision-making in practice without the pressure of live game situations. Stefanski reportedly told Haslam that this approach had worked for multiple successful quarterbacks throughout NFL history, and that patience would pay off in the long run, with Shedeur developing into a more complete and confident player. But Haslam, according to sources, wasn't interested in patience. Haslam had just invested significant assets to draft Shedeur, had made public commitments about him being the future, and had sold the fan base on immediate excitement around the new quarterback. The idea of Shedeur sitting on the bench while a journeyman veteran started games was.
The conflict between Haslam and Stefanski over Shedeur's development plan escalated throughout January and early February 2026, according to sources, with Haslam becoming increasingly frustrated that his head coach wouldn't commit to starting the quarterback ownership had selected. And that frustration ultimately led to Haslam making the decision to move on from Stefanski and bring in Todd Monken, who was more willing to do what ownership wanted regarding Shedeur's role. That's the story that dominated headlines when Stefanski's firing was announced. But what got lost in that narrative, what barely got mentioned publicly, was that Stefanski had also been warning ownership about a completely separate issue: Deshaun Watson. According to sources who were present for conversations between Stefanski and Brown's leadership during late 2025 and early 2026, Stefanski was consistently vocal about his concerns regarding Watson's presence on the roster and the impact his contract was having on team morale and roster construction. Stefanski, according to these sources, told ownership that Watson's massive guaranteed deal, combined with his poor performance and constant injuries, was creating resentment among teammates who were watching resources get consumed by a quarterback who wasn't delivering results. Stefanski reportedly warned that the financial constraints created by Watson's contract were making it impossible to retain good players like Wyatt Teller or to sign quality free agents, and that players were noticing and getting frustrated. But more significantly, according to sources, Stefanski warned specifically about what would happen when Watson's 12-game suspension ended and he returned to the facility. Stefanski reportedly predicted that Watson's return would be met with hostility from players who'd spent months watching the team struggle without him while knowing he was still collecting his full guaranteed salary. Stefanski allegedly told ownership that the locker room dynamics had shifted to the point where Watson's presence would be divisive regardless of how professionally he conducted himself, simply because the financial and competitive reality of his contract made him a symbol of organizational failure that players couldn't ignore. According to sources, Stefanski specifically predicted that the confrontation wouldn't come from veteran leaders like Myles Garrett, who had too much at stake to publicly attack a teammate, but rather from younger players who had less to lose and who felt emboldened by knowing that their frustration was widely shared, even if not openly expressed. That prediction, according to sources, was eerily specific and has now been proven exactly correct by what happened on Saturday. But at the time Stefanski made those warnings, according to sources, Haslam dismissed them as negativity and defeatism. Haslam's focus was entirely on the Shedeur situation and on his frustration with Stefanski not being willing to start the rookie immediately, and the Watson warnings got lost in that larger conflict. So when Stefanski was fired, the public narrative was about philosophical differences regarding quarterback development. But privately, according to sources, Stefanski left feeling that he'd tried to warn ownership about multiple disasters, the premature starting of Shedeur and the inevitable Watson locker room explosion, and that ownership had ignored both warnings and fired him for having the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. Now, roughly 3 weeks after Stefanski's departure, one of those warnings is coming true in spectacular fashion, while the other remains to be seen, depending on how the Shedeur situation plays out under Monken's leadership.
The medical clearance for Deshaun Watson came through on Saturday morning when doctors determined he was fit to resume football activities. Watson, according to sources, was relieved and optimistic about the clearance and decided to go to the Browns facility that afternoon to reconnect with the team and begin his transition back to active participation. But what Watson walked into, according to sources who were present, was a locker room environment that had fundamentally changed during his absence, poisoned by months of dysfunction, player departures, and growing resentment about the organizational chaos that his contract represented. When Watson arrived at the weight room around 2 p.m., according to sources, the reception was cold and uncomfortable. Players who were working out barely acknowledged him. A few offered brief hellos, but nobody stopped what they were doing to welcome him warmly or express genuine excitement about his return. Watson, according to sources, tried to make conversation and reconnect, but the interactions felt forced and awkward. And then Clive Brown entered the room. Clive Brown is a 6th-round rookie safety who spent most of his first season on special teams, rarely seeing significant defensive snaps. He's not a player with veteran status or locker room clout, but according to sources who know Brown, he's been one of the most outspoken players in private conversations among younger Browns about Watson's contract situation. Brown has apparently been telling teammates that players on rookie deals are the ones who suffer most from Watson's guaranteed money consuming cap space, because it prevents the team from signing quality veterans or building a competitive supporting cast. When Brown saw Watson in the weight room, according to multiple sources who witnessed what happened next, his expression changed immediately to something angry and determined. Brown walked directly toward Watson, and when he got close enough, he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Deshaun, real talk, what are you doing here? This team doesn't want you back. You need to collect your money and leave." The room went silent. Watson, stunned, reportedly responded, "Excuse me? Who do you think you're talking to? I'm here to work and help win games." Brown allegedly fired back, "Help win? You've won 9 games in 3 years while making $230 million guaranteed. Wyatt Teller's gone because of you. Nick Chubb's getting forced to restructure because of you. You've destroyed this team. Leave." Watson, according to sources, got visibly angry and stepped toward Brown, saying, "Watch your mouth, rookie." Brown stepped forward and said, "Everyone here knows I'm right. You're the problem." At that point, it looked like they might fight. Other players and coaches jumped between them and separated them physically, but the confrontation continued verbally, with both men shouting at each other while being held back. Eventually, they were separated enough that the immediate physical threat passed, but the damage was done. The locker room had just publicly fractured in the exact way Kevin Stefanski had predicted.
What happened next made it even worse. Other players started taking sides. Some veterans defended Watson, saying Brown was disrespectful and out of line. But other players backed Brown's position, saying he expressed what many felt but couldn't say. The argument moved from the weight room to the locker room and continued for 20 more minutes before Todd Monken was informed and called an emergency team meeting. In that meeting, according to sources, Monken tried to address the situation by acknowledging the difficulty while calling for professionalism, but the division in the room was stark. Players spoke up on both sides, some defending Watson's right to return and compete, others saying his contract makes his presence untenable regardless of his talent or effort. The argument ended without resolution, with Monken essentially telling everyone to cool off over the weekend and refocus on football Monday. Meanwhile, Kevin Stefanski, now consulting with the Atlanta Falcons, has been following all of this. According to sources who've spoken with Stefanski, his reaction has been bittersweet vindication. He warned this would happen. He told Haslam that Watson's return would cause exactly this kind of locker room explosion. He predicted a younger player would be the one to confront Watson publicly, and it all came true exactly as he said. But he got fired anyway, not because he was wrong about Watson, but because he was right about Shedeur needing development time that ownership wasn't willing to give. Sources say Stefanski has been telling people in the Falcons organization, "I tried to warn them about Watson. I told them the locker room would revolt when he came back. They didn't want to hear it because they were too focused on firing me over Shedeur. Now look what's happening." That vindication is making people around the NFL reconsider whether Stefanski's warnings and evaluations should be taken more seriously, even when they're negative or uncomfortable to hear. Kevin Stefanski's warnings about Watson destroying the locker room came true when Clive Brown confronted Watson and split the team. Stefanski predicted this exact scenario, but got fired for refusing to rush Shedeur Sanders, not for being wrong about Watson. Now, everything he said about Watson is happening, while the Shedeur situation remains unresolved under new leadership. The Browns ignored warnings that could have saved them, and they're paying the price.